This is So What Does Judaism Say About? Welcome back to another episode where we're going to talk about things that we talk about. I remember Rick Fox. With me as always is the happy clappy Rabbi Meir Beer. Rabbi Beer, how are you doing?
Fantastic. I'm happy to clap at it.
Yeah.
I'm doing great.
When I think of hippie, I think of Rabbi Meir Beer.
Yeah.
What does Judaism say about happiness, about our, feeling good?
Our attitudes to things.
Here's to feeling good all the time. You
All
know?
Right. A verse in Proverbs,
Right.
in Mishlei.
Oh, Proverbs, written by King Solomon,
There you go.
the wisest of all men.
The one and only. There's a verse in the 15th chapter of Mishlei.
Mishlei, Proverbs.
Proverbs. All the days of the poor person are bad, ra'im, but a tov lev, a person with a good heart, mishta tamid. Literally means constantly is partying. A mishta is a drinking party.
So all the days of a poor person are terrible, but a person with a good heart is always partying.
That's right. It's always happy.
But not the poor person? Yes, the poor person.
Well, poor is a metaphor for something.
Ah. You mean that it's a parable?
It's philosophy, man.
I hear. You're telling me that Proverbs was a proverb? Okay. Interesting.
Yeah.
I saw an interesting thing. It was like a card about it. It was fake, obviously. They said I asked the kid what do you want when you grow up? And the teacher says, what do you want when you grow up? And the kid says, happy. He says, I don't think you understand the question. He says, I don't think you understand life.
Exactly.
I don't know if that happened, but
There are miserable, successful people and happy people that objectively we wouldn't consider very successful.
Right. So what do you got?
Yeah. So we'll start with the Talmud. Tractate Sanhedrin, page 100b.
That's where I was going to go.
Yeah.
Obviously.
I'm sorry for beating you to it.
Obviously.
We all have the sheets in front of us.
Yeah, exactly.
Look at our messy little table. Yeah. The Talmud, quoting this, says a couple of points. Number one, a person who is poor, all his days are bad, somebody who is married to a bad spouse.
Oh.
A person who is a tov lev is a good heart because he's married to a good spouse. So it's Mishnah Talmud, life's always good, right? Come home from work after a hard day to a spouse that you love, who cares about you. That's your life, All right, whatever happened to the office today happened. But you can have a great job, but if you don't want to drive home,
Ooh.
that's terrible.
Ooh.
Number one. Number two, a person who is an istinus. An istinus is a very picky person, a person that never finicky, never can be happy in any situation, is a poor person. He's not going to enjoy a fantastic dinner because the forks weren't placed evenly.
Ugh.
So, whereas a person that is easygoing can kind of find enjoyment in things, just like the hamburger was delicious. I had a great meal. It was
So
fantastic.
now that we've successfully described Larry David across the board, what do we do now?
Yeah, so this is number two. We're getting an idea of who a poor person is.
Okay.
And the opposite of a poor person isn't a rich person.
Right.
It's a tov lev, a person with a good heart.
That's interesting. Doesn't say rich. It says the poor person compared with the good heart.
Right. A person who is small-minded, daito katsara,
Right.
a person who's always nervous about things, is a poor person. A person who is a daito rachava, is wide mind, is accepting, is easygoing, is a tov lev. Life's always a party. And the last thing that the Talmud mentions is a person that is knowledgeable about Mishnah is a poor person, a person that knows Talmud, who not only knows the basic, so to speak, headings of the oral law, but has a wide range of knowledge, is a tov lev. His intellectual, understanding of things allows him to be a Mishnah Talmud.
Right. It's interesting because the Mishnah is so broad, but the Talmud gets into all the different case specifics. So now you have no reason to be nervous. You know what the case is. You know what's going on. You know how to behave.
Exactly. But as this is certainly a direct meaning, but also metaphorically, a person that has a broader, deeper knowledge of how to live is a person that's going to be
Happier.
Yeah. And then life could be Mishnah Talmud. Life could always be a party.
Always a party.
Right. If you have insight into things, you're equipped with the ability to make the best of situations, and you're with a bunch of friends and at the restaurant and the food just 20 minutes late. That happens sometimes. You have the life experience. You're not going to let it ruin your night out with your friends, and you're going to have a great time anyway. And when the waiter comes over to you, who's just because one of his coworkers didn't show up and he's late, and you're pleasant to him because you know that there's nothing you can do about it. And then he like, when it quiets down an hour later, he's bringing you out extra desserts because you didn't bother him because he was going through a rough day, and you end up like having the most amazing time.
Yeah.
That comes from a certain kind of knowledge of knowing how to deal with situations.
What stops us from just being like that all the time? That sounds great.
This combination of daito katsara, being small-minded, and not having enough knowledge and situational awareness. So these are keys that Talmud is teaching us to being not wealthy, because money is not necessarily a guarantee of happiness, but a tov lev, good heart. You know how to deal with things. You know how to make the best of things. And there's certain families, cultures, communities that foster this kind of attitude of just making the best of it and just having a good time.
Dancing in the rain, they say.
Yeah. Even if you don't have an umbrella.
I mean, I think the point is you don't have the umbrella. I think you're wet. You're wet either way. You may as well get down.
Yeah.
Let it happen.
And when you get home, you'll change.
If you like going home, to your point.
There you go. But certainly from a spiritual perspective, this has a lot of meaning as well. The Medrash Tanchuma writes that God says that if you observe the mitzvos of the Torah and you're happy, then I will kind of give you happiness. I will increase your happiness. The Jerusalem Talmud writes about an individual who, when he used to go to the festivities and the parties on the holiday of Sukkot, the kind of like the divine spirit would rest on him because of the joy that he experienced at that event. The Mishnah Brura, a very important halachic work written in the early 1900s, quotes a teaching that the Arizal, one of the famous Kabbalists, said that he was able to attain a lot of his insights because he studied with joy. The Sefer Haredim, another important work along these lines, writes about a Kabbalist by the name of the Rabbi Yitzchak Ashkenazi, who said the depths of his deep knowledge was because he was able to study with joy. So there's a direct correlation even to how much a person can study by how much joy and meaning they have in that process.
Right. So how does a person achieve that through difficult life circumstances? That all sounds great for the Sefer Haredim. Wonderful.
Right.
What about the average Joe?
So
what are we going to do over here? And everybody wants to be happy. You ask the question, right? Do you want money or do you want happiness? Well, we tend to correlate them. Success in this country tends to be a one-sided conversation. And would you rather be successful or happy? Like, I don't know if people are really dealing with this as much as they should. What do you really want? It's a funny thing. And even people that I guess pray tend to pray for money. Even people that pray for money instead of praying that they can deal with the situation that they're in. Pray for yourself to be happier, have a deal with the situation better. It's interesting that we're not really getting to the root here, which is get this good heart pumping.
Let me ask you a rude question.
Yes.
Are you rich?
Of course.
There's people with more money than you.
Absolutely.
So what makes you rich?
Oh, because I'm happy with my portion, Rabbi Beer.
Well said. Well said.
It's not your portion. It's mine, and I dig it.
Right, and it's just your place.
It's interesting. We were talking about it earlier today, and actually, if you played any musical instruments, and you said no, but you would like to, and then we went behind the drums, right? And like I can, and it's not like you can't, but the fact that it brings me so much joy, like it's so rich and part of my life that I always say. My father used to say, no one can take that away from you. No one can take that away from you. I was built up on that kind of thing.
I'm going to reveal something to the public.
You really can play an
Rabbi
instrument?
Fox is a terrible volleyball player.
That's true.
It is true.
My father-in-law was varsity in college volleyball player.
I didn't know that.
Right. Most people don't. You wouldn't know to look at him. But it's an amazing thing. Like there's things you can't take away from somebody. I get excited about those things. I don't care if the music, no one even knows, I got friends who stayed in the bands and became famous. Guess what happened to them? Can't say it on the podcast. It's what's happened to them. And they're famous. They're famous. They made it.
Right. So this is
back to you.
This is the Vilna Gaon's interpretation.
We're on air. Back to you
of this verse, taking all these teachings from the Talmud and distilling it into a message. A poor person is a person who is unhappy with his lot. It has nothing to do with your bank account state, and it is unlikely that anyone is ever going to be the richest, or from the Forbes 400 list. There aren't that many people on the list.
It turns out only 400 people can be on the 400 list,
and many of those people might be pretty miserable. Might not. I don't know.
Right.
I don't know. I don't know very many of them personally.
Right.
The end of the day, a person is poor is a mindset, right? Now, obviously, if you can't pay your bills and you're struggling to make your mortgage, that's an objective problem. But within a person having something and making the best of it, so to speak, having that experience, which is whatever money you currently have, and just making the best of it, and going to the library because it's free to get, museum passes rather than just doing any events you want.
I know that shtick. It's a good shtick.
Yeah, but there's people who have a good time
Right.
without having a lot of resources and become cultured without a lot of resources.
Right.
It's possible. And those people, often have a happy, healthy, like just deal with it attitude. And those people are not poor. The poor person, the person who feels poor, who's internally poor because he doesn't have enough.
Tight.
Exactly. Is the person who his days are always bad. The Tov Lev, the person is like, okay, that's what it is. We're going to make the best of it. Doesn't mean we don't have to try to improve or get more, but it is, as much as this is the current situation, we're going to make the best of it, is Mishta Tamid. What does Mishta Tamid mean? A Mishta is a drinking party. You're constantly drinking. So what he says is the following. You have a person who's going through a rough time. He goes to the bar, and this is the Vilna Gaon writes, not this exact description, but more or less, and he drinks a bunch. Nothing bothers him because he's drunk. He just forgets about his sorrows, forgets about his worries. The problem is he wakes up the next morning, they're there. But if you can make the best of your situation, you'll be constantly drinking. You'll always be in that
You'll
state.
have the effect of alcohol.
Exactly.
Which is,
So then you don't need the drugs
wow.
because you can create the happiness. It can be hard, but you can create that situation. You can create that this is not going to bother me. I'm not going to let this get under my skin. I'm going to make the best of it, which alcohol can artificially do for you, but you can do that without ruining your liver.
Okay, so hilariously, right? America is on these lists of world's happiest countries. It's always somewhere around like 19, and then immediately we get to work. Why are we not number one? Which of course is why we're not number one, right? Because why are we not number one? But it's a lot of the South American countries. Israel's usually high up there in the happiness realm of the constituents of the.
It's interesting how they gauge that.
Yeah, I wonder what they're doing.
What are the metrics for happiness?
That's a good question. But
They're
whatever,
smart people. I'm sure they've come up with something reasonable.
with no agenda, I'm not sure. But here's my question, right? What Americans seem to struggle with this more so. We are on a lot of antidepressants. We are on a lot of anti-anxiety medication, more than the rest of the world. A lot more.
I think part of it is for some people, just kind of recognizing that objectively you're mediocre is something they just don't want to deal with, and they will not come to terms with that, and then need an artificial way of keeping them happy. I was listening to a lecture from Rabbi Avram Pam, passed away, I think about 15 years ago. Was a well-known rabbi and a dean of a yeshiva in Brooklyn, and he was mentioning that his yeshiva had and he primarily focused on the post-high school, but there was a high school, and there was a 15-year-old student in the high school, let's say 10th grade or so, who kept on asking him, like obsessively, how can I improve my studies? Should I use this technique, that methodology, study this type of area of Jewish teachings or whatever it is? And after a while, he asked him, like, why are you so nervous? Like, your grades are fine. Like, why are you obsessing over this? Like, why are you calling a meeting with me every 2 weeks to do this? So the student told him, he's like, well, when the Chafetz Chaim, who was one of the leading halakhic authorities and world famous rabbi, was my age, he was well ahead of me.
Right.
So he said, I turned to the student and I very bluntly told him, you're never going to be that person. You're an average human being, and become happy with that, or you're never going to be a happy person. Be happy being average. It's fine. So a lot of people feel that happiness is in objectively excelling, and they don't want to see that they're never going to get there. They're just a regular person with a regular intelligence, with a regular financial, potential, without realizing you can excel in being happy in that. And the subjective is more important than the objective in this case.
That is beautifully said. What stops a person from accepting that? What stops them there? Yeah?
I don't know.
You like that one?
I think people like
I was going to ask you that one, Rabbi Beer. What stops a person then from okay, so what stops us from accepting that? Because maybe I'm listening to this and I'm like, oh, but of course I'm not one of the average people. What stops us? There's two stages. One is realizing that, and then two, accepting that. Those are two steps.
They're tied together because people don't want to realize it because they don't want to accept it. But I think for some people, the subtleties of working out all this are a little overwhelming. So they want to simplify life by saying, oh, if I just had more money, it would all click into place. It won't. It'll click into place when you learn rigorously and with much effort to make the best of any situation you're in.
It's amazing. It's amazing how money makes us feel not average. Nothing changed. Think about that for a second. That is a hilarious metric. $1 billion means I'm not an idiot? No, still an idiot with $1 billion. Probably a very dangerous idiot, actually, with the $1 billion. Very interesting. An average person with, it's interesting that that's a metric. That somehow we ascribe greatness. That's interesting to me.
Yeah, I had this thought. I remember a couple of months ago, I was reading, I don't remember why, but I was reading a options list of a car in the 1950s. So it was the Ford whatever, and it was all optional equipment. So the Chromerator Deluxe spinny hubcaps were an extra $26. And the chromerating trim, all this like 1950s language, tail fin on the back of the car was an extra $14. And I'm thinking to myself, like, this is all like silly. Like, who cared about how much chrome was on the car? But then I'm thinking to myself, but from our own perspective, is the 11-inch navigation screen or the 8-inch navigation screen options on the cars that we buy really objectively any different? But we somehow think that that's a definitively better car. It's like the heat in your car always works. Seat heaters and steering wheel heaters are nice, but it's not really changing the experience that much. But we view them as being two completely different cars.
You sound like a man who's never sat in a heated seat, because it is amazing.
Well, I kind of like the ventilated seats because
that's even double amazing.
No, that's a real thing. I don't like heat. I drive with my wife in the car in the winter. I'm shutting off the heat. But the ventilated seats are real. That's just that's something you really should be seeking. But you kind of get the vibes. Like in 40 years from now, you're going to go back and look at cars now. It's like then there's going to be like, is your car going to teleport in an hour or an hour and a half?
What about the fact that it has to go from 0 to 60 in 3.1 versus 3.2? That's crazy.
Yeah, so I'm not saying
although
it isn't a better.
The cop cars in Dubai are Lamborghinis. That is verified.
You've seen them.
I want to be a cop in Dubai.
Interesting.
For this reason. It is a monumental discussion. We're cracking open just the beginning of what is an actually quite serious conversation, which is learning to accept who you are, what you're good at, what makes you great, not what makes you better than anybody else, what makes you yourself. That a geschmack yid, a wonderful person that people want to be around, people like being around. This mishta tamid, I think it's an amazing twisting on its head, raising realization. I was going to say chap, but I was going to know what I mean. Amazing realization to party all the time means party all the time, but not get to that place where things aren't bothering you and you can sit with yourself, be the leiv tov. I mean, people are going to want to be around you. It's probably a cycle that just keeps going. It's amazing.
Yeah, to take this over to more of like a religious, ritualistic type of viewpoint, the Tanya writes in chapter 31 that a person's depression has no role in healthy spirituality. The only time a person should be concerned over their shortcomings even is when they're doing what's called vidya, which is like personal confession, when you're trying to like really scrutinize yourself to propel yourself forward in a better place.
Right.
But to simply like sit on the fact that you're not a perfect person, which could be something that is true, is not something that will necessarily help you spiritually.
Right.
Like if you're in a defined moment where you have to like, okay, I have to confront mistakes I'm making, I have to change them, then you worry about your shortcomings. But to walk around while you're doing spiritual practices like studying or praying or things like that and be like, no, my prayer's not what it should be, it's not going to be a very healthy a healthy addition or component to your observance or to your practices.
Right.
He says that atzvas, like depression, is what he calls when the heart is stuffed up like a stone. Like it makes you cold.
Yeah.
It doesn't allow you to express things you need
also,
to feel.
Stones are heavy. You can't move. Depressed people, what they do is they're
sluggish.
They can't move. They have to get moving, and it's real. It's I feel terrible. It's a real terrible thing. It's a real thing. They can't. This stone. It can't move.
But the point where he says that if you're bitter or have a brokenhearted, because there's actually energy there, that's a better place to be in than just being sluggish and depressed and just feeling down.
Right.
If you feel sad, that can be a more productive feeling than feeling depressed.
And come back to happiness.
But happiness is the best thing to be.
But 1 second here. The thing about happiness, this is a crazy sentence that I say sometimes. One of the happiest weeks of my life was the week after my father left this world, and we did the Shiva for him for that week. When I say happy, I don't mean I was clappy. When I was joyous, meaning I felt like I was doing the right thing, and I felt like I was totally expressing myself completely and really being in the pain. And only afterwards did I realize how not only cathartic, but how uplifting that process was. Just to take it to the other side.
Yeah, I want to take the point you made, which is I think the key to this whole discussion, and blow it up a little.
Okay.
And that is the following. We usually associate happiness, and I'm quoting an essay from Rav Dessler, with a person filling a void or a lacking. I wanted to get a driver's license. Now I got the driver's license. I wanted to buy my first home. Now I bought my first home.
That's relief. That's not happiness.
Yeah. I want to get the beach house, and now I got the beach house. The problem is, so you fill the void, and then there's a new void.
Yeah.
You're never really going to get to true happiness. Whereas certain things that make us happy are not there specifically because of a void. So if you're nice to people, that makes you happy.
Not a void, right?
There's no void there.
Right.
And he proves this from Jewish philosophy. There's a basic concept in Jewish philosophy that God is not lacking anything. God does not need things. You can't give him food to eat because that would denote that he's missing food or he's hungry. There's no hunger. There's nothing lacking in God's completeness. That being the case, there's an idea in Judaism, which is found in all the philosophical systems of traditional Judaism, that God created the world out of an act of giving, out of benevolence. He wanted to create creatures that could find fulfillment and meaning and an identity. So he created existence. But wouldn't that denote a lacking? Because if I wanted to give someone something, is that because I need to give? The answer is no.
Right.
You can give to people because the experience is a wholesome experience, not because you're a person missing something.
Right.
You're not filling a void within yourself. And this is really the essence of how to discover happiness. That's why you can have objectively a relatively small paycheck, but be like, this is the situation. It's going to be good. Right? I'm viewing happiness as not a way to, this is missing, we're going to have to fill it in. There's a gap here, I need to fill it in. Because you're never going to fill in all the gaps, and you're never going to fill them in well. And when you finally get the Ferrari, you're going to have a headache, and when you drive 180 miles an hour, it's just going to make you nauseous.
And it's going to cost a fortune to fix and take care of it, and you get worried about dinging it up.
Right, and your personal assistant is going to lose the keys, and you're not going to find it. And then the guy who's going to buff the car messes it up, and it's not polished right. And when you pull up to the club, it's like he's the fry that it wasn't waxed right, or all the headaches of the rich and famous. I don't know. I've never been there, but I imagine it's a tormented existence.
Tal Shachar, one of the modern positive psychologists, is Israeli, right? He should have just read Dessler, right? He's saying that we mistake relief for happiness, which is why also when you meet, like myself, when I got into Penn in 2003, I went through Penn, but the happiness of getting into Penn suddenly diminished over time. You see this with students at Penn, right? Why are you not as ecstatic? Some people cry when they open up the acceptance letter. What happened? Why junior year all stressed out? What's the problem? We're confusing relief for happiness.
Right, but if your kind of life's mission is, well, I'm very proud that I accomplished this. And I'm still going to try to accomplish as much as I can.
Right.
I am viewing my success only on my own terms and with my own goals, which are hopefully healthy and good ones. And I feel positive that I'm growing and I'm attaining them and I'm gaining more knowledge, and the process becomes something meaningful and not just the, definitive checkpoints along the process. Now that's a person with a true happiness. Now you can expand out of yourself and become a good person, a healthy person, and a moral person, which are all sources of happiness because you've now defined yourself as being a good person.
Right.
You're not looking to fill voids. You're looking to find meaning in everything that exists within yourself.
Beautiful. Simcha, happiness, the general happiness in Judaism, simcha, with not the Tovlei point, but simcha, the Vilna Gaon also says this is the happiness of a process. This is the happiness of, I'm enjoying what's going on right now.
And then you're just Tovlei Mishatamid, you're just always drunk, man.
Always drunk, man. Always drunk. In fact, it's almost Shabbos. And
what are you going to be drinking tonight?
Exactly.